Welcome everybody today to this really special lunch. It's my absolute privilege to introduce Gaven Morris. Gavin asked me to first off pass on a message to some younger ABC journalists he's especially invited. He asked me to tell you that any ABC young journalist who asks the question most likely to get the answer to land Gavin in the Australian media column will get an immediate pay rise. And if you can land the Daily Double, the Oz media section and Senate estimates, it's a Christmas bonus. But Gav's passion for the young journalists being here reflects, I think, his absolute contribution to the ABC and to greater public life in Australia, which is a contribution to journalism. When I think of Gavin's contribution, I don't think of the controversies, I think about the journalism that we're all talking about even today. There's been some agenda-setting stuff. I think of the investigative unit in the ABC that Gaven helped set up. So when my unit hates his unit, that's a good thing. But ultimately, it's about that contribution to public service journalism that I think Gaven would be most proud of in the most challenging environment I've ever seen as a journalist. In my 20 years as a reporter, and more than half of that has been with the ABC on and off at times, the ABC is under more scrutiny, facing more controversy, is under more pressure to file via digital deadlines than ever before. And certainly Gav's at the centre of that firestorm. So I'm really looking forward to hearing some comments about his time since October 2015, heading the most controversial department of the ABC. And then I'll ask him a few questions. I really like the flow, to throw the questions to the floor. And I'd encourage you all to ask tough questions. We're not here to have any puff pieces. That burning question you want to ask of Gavin, especially if you're from the ABC, he's only your boss for one more day. Go ahead. It'll be all the better for it. So a round of applause to Gaven Morris.
Well, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you all so much for coming along. It's really an honour to be down here in Melbourne and to be welcoming you all back out into the real world and the community after, I think, many people have commented already to me, this is the first time you've been able to go to a function in a while. So, if I'm only the catalyst for that, then I'm doing some good today. Look, can I firstly acknowledge that wherever we are today, we're on Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander land, and I want to acknowledge the elders of those lands and present and pay my respects to any Indigenous people who are here with us today or listening further afield. My thanks to the Melbourne Press Club for having me here today, to Nick McKenzie, the president of the club, who I'm mildly terrified about what he's going to ask me shortly, those steely blue eyes bearing in on me. I'm also very grateful to Kathy Bryson, the General Manager, and Kate Handley, and everyone who's put a lot of work into this event today to make it happen. I want to really pay a special vote of thanks to Sally Jackson, who has put a lot of effort into this event today, but really for all of my 6 years in this role has been there with me in the trenches all the way along, fighting the good fight and giving me some words to say at times when I didn't have any. So Sally, thank you very much for being here. Now, I know why you're all here today. You're here in the Hive to hear Gav Unplugged, right? This is me liberated from the strictures of ABC management, downloading on the critics in a sort of graceless Twitter-esque tirade of bile. I'm sorry, I'm probably going to disappoint you because that's not where I'm going with this today. I am so thrilled to see many people in the room today who I've shared a long association with over many, many years, and I've had the honour of working alongside and among. I've had the great pleasure in this career of being able to walk among some giants of journalism, and for that I'll be forever grateful. And few of them are in the room today. I especially want to thank Denise Erickson, who is here in the centre. Denise took a punt on me and gave me my very first job at the ABC. It was a youth current affairs show called Attitude, and I was the uncool one. I was 20 years old. I'd never worked in broadcasting before. I'd never been to Melbourne before I was given the job. And Denise took a chance on me. It's the best job I've ever had through my career. And I am the opposite of youth now. But Denise is still a very important person in my life and in my family's life, so I'm really thrilled to see Denise here today. To the royalty in the room, Barry and Heather, two of my favourite people with whom I've shared so many incredible times since I was Barry's eager producer 25 years ago. At times they've rescued me, literally. At times they've tried to kill me on a long night or two. But they've always supported me, and I'm very grateful to have them as friends. Amid all of us old hands, it's very important to have with us today, to have with us today, many of the emerging stars of ABC News, many of them the middle table here. Today, I want to speak to them as much as anyone else, because I think journalism is healthier than we feared it might be just a few years ago. The ABC is stronger, more relevant, and more crucial to Australia than at any time in its history. The ABC News audience is bigger, broader, and more diverse than it has ever been. For the next generation, there is much to be excited about. As I reach my destination, I wanted today to share some reflections on the journey I've taken, full of so many experience I never dared to imagine as I set out on it. I do this in the hope that it leads a few of you and a few others out there listening, any journalism students in the room today, to try a little harder, reach a little higher, and travel a little further than you might otherwise have done. I want you to imagine where it could take you. So, let's begin in Bethlehem, as so much has. It's the spring of 2002, the middle of the Second Intifada. The Church and the Nativity is under siege. Inside, Palestinians accused by Israel of being militants along with monks and civilians and staff of the church are sheltering. And outside, the Israeli military have guns trained on the walls of the church, and they're there to try and arrest the Palestinians. I'm on the barbed wire barricades just off Manger Square and at the CNN rooftop live shot. I've been producing the coverage of military snipers picking off anyone who appears in a window, watching the ancient church that's seen so much and waiting for a diplomatic resolution to be struck far from where I am. On this day, we know that some Palestinians have been bussed away, apparently set for a life in exile, never to return to their homes and families. In the Intifada, this is the imbalance of compromise. I've got the fortune on this day of working with one of CNN's most experienced camera operators, Christian Stribe, who's now CNN's chief international photojournalist. And I suggest to him that we take a sneak peek down a side street towards the Israeli military's restricted zone. We're very aware that if we venture down there, the Israelis are likely to fire on anything that moves. But as we peek, there's no sign of the tanks and the guns, and so I ask him out loud whether we venture a little closer. We walk. Christian thinks I'm crazy at this point, and green, and I am. This is my very third week in a conflict zone in the Middle East. This is how journalism works sometimes. You find yourself in places at times that you couldn't have imagined just a couple of months before. So Christian and I walk, we run, we clench our buttocks, and we turn a corner. The Israelis have gone, there's no one there. But there is a tiny little wooden door. The door of humility is the most revered entrance to the birthplace of Christ. It's just over 4 feet tall. We push on it, bow our heads, and enter the church. Inside, we're alone. Only make-do bedding and remnants of 5 weeks of captivity. Christian turns on the camera and starts shooting. I explore further and descend into the crypt with a silver star on the floor. It's the spot that Jesus is said to have been born. On my own, in this place, I take a moment. How did I get here? I then dial up my correspondent, one of CNN's legends, Walt Rogers. Walt, I whisper, we're in the church. What church? He barks back. The church, Walt, get down here right now, I say. Walt soon breaks the news to the world that the siege is over. The final Palestinians have gone, the Israelis have withdrawn, and the Church of the Nativity has been given back to the people. When a monk emerges and says, it's not safe, there are rumours of explosives still inside the church, we head back towards the tiny door. As we open it, Manger Square is now alive. They've seen Walt's report. Thousands of liberated locals are celebrating, and right at the front, Fixed on us and the door is the rest of the world's media. We strut through the pack, gathering their jealous glares and rush the tape back to the satellite uplink. It's a global exclusive. CNN broke the story and we've got the only pictures. It's a long story that I wanted to share with you. Just a single day. One of the most extraordinary days a person could experience, but just one day in this extraordinary job. It's what this unpredictable career can give you. Massive moments etched in the world's memory, witnessed and reported by us firsthand. From Liberia to Lebanon, from Iran to Argentina, Belconnen to Belfast, this job has taken me to places and moments we're familiar with, sometimes for all the wrong reasons. It's also the places few of us have ever heard of: Calac, Vytown, Bitterfeld, Ballacott and Bingol, that often have the most profound and lasting impacts on your life. Journalism amazes us when we're in the field and when we're covering stories, but at times it will also shatter your spirit. So, younger journalists, let's talk a little about Bingol, one small city that I'll never really recover from. It's 2003, I've been in northern Iraq for the entire Iraq war. Saddam's now deposed, it's all winding down, mission accomplished apparently. All the network stars have gone home and I'm exhausted wrapping up CNN's operation in Erbil. Just north of us, a 17-second earthquake in southern Turkey brings the CNN assignment desk to life. A school has collapsed. They're mounting a rescue operation for dozens of trapped children. Can you get there? It'll be the miracle tale, kids rescued alive, just what the world needs right now. My crew and I travelled all night, glad to be finally out of Iraq. As we arrived in Bingol, our hope evacuated. The Kurdish school is built on sand because in this part of Turkey, that's all Kurds are worth. It was barely a pancake stack. No miracles would emerge from that sand pit in Bingol. In fact, 84 small bodies came out one by one. Amid the aftershocks, I went to a funeral in one tiny hillside village. 13 children were buried at once. The entire future of that town. The Bingol earthquake is worth 300 words on Wikipedia. But I think of those people most days, nearly 20 years on. I'm telling this not to discourage anybody, not to scare you off, but to be honest about the privilege we're granted and sometimes the futility of it. Those families, their dead children, and the story told to a global audience gave them a voice, if just briefly, and possibly to no lasting effect. But giving voice to the voiceless matters in journalism. It was the motto of Al Jazeera English, which I had the privilege to help set up after CNN. From the desert dust rose a news giant that vowed to report the global South as if it were as important as the dominant West, because it is. This adventure of journalism. I've had machine guns in my face, been bombed and shot at, skimmed the desert in choppers with American generals, shed tears for lost souls I didn't know, seen terrorism too close, but also humanity in all its beauty. As journalists, we experience these things and we seek to explain them, even when they're beyond our own comprehension. I've covered queens and popes farewelled and dictators dethroned, Merkel elected, Keating defeated, helped discover Silverchair. I'll take that one to the grave. And introduced Australia to Bill Shorten as a very young man with very big ambitions. I've been on Oprah, on Larry King Live, worked with Amanpour, Blitzer, Anderson Cooper and Richard Quest, Sir David Frost and Tucker Carlson, Lynham and Ollie, Tingle and Kelly. I'm equally in awe of all the camos, soundos, editors that taught me so much along the way. The sat dish engineers stuck in war zones where we cried and laughed and just tried to get by. The subs and producers so focused on excellence. The graphics magicians and studio maestros. And so crucially, the fixers and local producers without whom international journalism would be impossible. My profound respect to them. So I spent a few moments reflecting on all of this. I wanted to remind aspiring journalists one thing. It's really important to know this. When I decided to be a journalist, I had never met one. I had no powerful patrons or networks. No one in my family had ever been to university. I was proudly the son of a fireman and a secretary, growing up in a single-parent home. I was powered by curiosity, which in my humble view is the essential fuel for success in this business. In my very first paid job in journalism, because you do a lot of free jobs before you do the paid jobs, I was a copy kid for Fairfax newspapers in the press gallery. PS, pre-Spears. A constellation of journalism stars in the midst of a leadership contest between Hawke and Keating. I had a Parliament House pass that could get me anywhere in the building anonymously. I was 18 years old and I soaked up every minute. I observed how the leadership battle unfolded, saw the reported anonymous sources speaking to the journalists. When I read it, when I cut it out and pasted it onto a file note the next day, because that was my job, I knew exactly who they were. I went to the press conferences, corridor parties and Christmas drinks. I barely ever said a word, but I drank it all in. What a way to learn. So here I am at the other end. And for the past 13 years back at the ABC, having come home, I knew that how vital the national broadcaster is to our understanding of the region around us and the regional communities within our borders. International reporting and giving local people a say in the national conversation, these remain the bookends of what the ABC service offers all Australians. We are a service, a public service. Not a competitor in a media marketplace. I believe this so much. And as such, every decision we take, every dollar we spend, we need to show all Australians we provide them with true value. This is what drove my passion to be involved in the launch of ABC News 24 and to build a team and a strategy that could lead us to become the #1 source of digital news and information in Australia. How could we be a taxpayer-funded news organisation with 1,200 staff and a $200 million budget and not provide comprehensive and trusted services around the clock to audiences on their terms, not our deadlines, not the rhythms of our newsrooms, on their terms? They pay for us. They deserve the service when it suits them. I'm going to bring Barry into the conversation here. I think probably a memory that he's long since kind of tried to erase from the back parts of his brain. So Barry will remember with horror my first impetuous act on my return to the ABC. It's October 2008, and the United States is about to elect an African American as president. This is a truly historic global moment on any scale. It was the yes we can election, but at the ABC it was a no we can't plan. ABC News had no desire or capability to provide extended live coverage of the presidential election or election night. So I decided we would. Barry was on a visit to the US, so I roped him in and stuck him on an icy curb outside our Washington bureau with a view of the traffic. We stuck Scott Bevan in a broom closet in Ultimo without a working control room, and with a lot of help of a CNN simulcast, we mounted something like a live coverage. Barry, with no disrespect to your efforts on that day or to Scott's, it is easily the worst broadcast I've ever produced. Well, that was it for me. Either the ABC was going to join the contemporary news world and provide Australians with much better value for money, or it was going to rapidly die. This just was not feasible, that this was the state of the ABC at the time. Today, the ABC News channel has a weekly reach of almost 16% of all Australians, up each of the last 2 years in a shrinking TV market. On top of that, add another 250,000 daily live streams of the channel on iView and YouTube. Over 50% of Australians, or 14 million people, use our website and our news app every month. Well over double the number more than double the number of the audience when we launched the Equal Digital Life strategy 6 years ago. ABC News is the #1 digital news brand and was so every month in 2020 and for almost every month in 2021. At the same time, we're sustaining our loyal broadcast listeners and viewers. In 2021, key radio newscast programs reached an average of 2.3 million Australians every week across the metro networks. And in regional Australia, ABC Local Radio reaches 3 million Australians every week. We've got enduring, loved brands that are so precious to Australians. Australian Story turned 25 this year. Four Corners turned 60. 60. And AM and PM punctuate our world each day as they have for so long. The 7 p.m. news and 7:30 are still the most popular hour of television day in, day out, all year round that the ABC produces. On my last day on Friday, I'll listen to that long, majestic fanfare on the 7 a.m. radio news and reflect on all it stands for, 90 years of service to the public, and the small part I played in it. We have newer service kicking incredible goals. ABC Investigations, led by Joe Pacini, the specialist reporting team led by Lisa Whitby. Searching for and telling incredible stories in the public interest, not for broadcast deadlines, but wherever the audience wants the content. But in ways across all of our platforms that suit the audience's habits. I'm so very proud of all of these teams. They rarely get recognition, but have raised the value of what ABC News does on behalf of all Australians. I once said about our digital strategy, I did not want Four Corners to be more digital. I wanted our digital service to be more Four Corners. And that's what we've achieved in recent years. I'll say one thing, just, because you're all expecting something, to our increasingly shrill critics from the vested interests of the media to the unhinged rantings on social media. We're not your target because we're failing. We're your target because we're winning and succeeding. We don't have to remember too far back when the criticisms of the ABC and ABC News was its audience was too small, it's too niche, it's too urban, we don't break stories, where's the journalism? We don't have an impact, we're too narrow. I don't hear those criticisms now. Now we're too big, we're too popular, we're too successful on digital, too impactful with our journalism, too many stories leading the agenda, too omnipresent in Australians' lives, too diverse. All with lower budgets. ABC News is also setting the standard in the Australian media in our initiatives to reflect the full diversity of modern Australia, in our workforce, in our content and in our storytelling, including through projects such as 50-50 equality and in reflecting our Indigenous heritage and culture. We should aspire not just to be the national broadcaster, but the broadcaster for all the nations of Australia. If this is not fundamental to the mission of a public broadcaster in Australia, then what is? The ABC's made more progress on these issues, I think, in 5 years than we made in the 50 years before that. And so we should have, because it was about time. In our content and in our workforce as well, we've got Bridget Brennan, who was Australia's first Indigenous foreign correspondent and is now on the news leadership team. Isabella Higgins, our current London correspondent. Stan Grant, well, everywhere in prime time, seemingly. Naz Campanella is our awesome Disability Affairs correspondent and the chair of the ABC Inclusive, and Charles Bryce is an excellent reporter in South Australia for News Breakfast, both with lived experience of disability. We did not have people in these roles several years ago. Australians living with a disability didn't even have a voice at the public broadcaster, let alone anywhere else in the media. Behind them, we're bringing on other talented young journos. A few of them are here in the room tonight. They're from the suburbs, from the bush, from cultures and backgrounds that all Australians can relate to. Watch them rise. Finally, we've transformed. Not long ago, we were a linear broadcaster worried about our ageing and declining audiences. Now we're a digital leader, an innovator ready for the on-demand future. Amid all the Harvey Norman advertising flooding commercial media, there's an unspoken truth. Not a television they sell needs an aerial on your roof. We all buy app-based, internet-connected smart TVs with on-demand choices that suit our lifestyles these days. You can't listen to AM radio in an electric car. How many of us will own and drive electric cars in the years ahead? So at the ABC, we spend hundreds of millions of dollars a year on linear broadcasting, transmission off those towers you see on the hills and all the rest of it, to increasingly smaller reception points. It's necessary for now, but for how long? And what content, what might we otherwise invest in if we weren't spending hundreds of millions of dollars on terrestrial transmission in the future? Imagine an ABC where the B doesn't define us anymore, What might we be if not a broadcaster? The post-broadcast world isn't far away. And are we ready for it? Well, I think the ABC is better placed than anybody else in the industry. And when I look across the world, you look at all the so-called legacy broadcasters, and I think we are ahead of the game in providing an outstanding service to all Australians in this digital, on-demand and personalised media future. It's great value to each and every one of us. So, young journalists, let's end where we began, with your opportunity. In 2001, I stood in the CNN newsroom and watched live as the second plane silently glided into the World Trade Center. Less profoundly than many others, my life changed in that moment. There were no camera phones that day. There was no social media. Radio still ruled and satellite television was back, baby. At CNN, we were back on top of the ratings and everybody was tuning into us. Following the dot-com bust the previous year, everybody assumed the internet was a declining force, not a growing one. Those few and rare TV images that captured the events of that day still define our understanding of the horror. For a moment, imagine that day unfolding today. Through millions of random postings on Twitter and Facebook, people falling to their deaths, fire trucks rushing to the scene, all of it on social media, all of it told in graphic detail. Twitter and Facebook alight, YouTube and Insta, the dying, the surviving, the eyewitnesses, and the opinionated. In one generation, everything has changed. The way we gather the news, the way we see stories, the way we interact with audiences, and the way we interpret the meaning of it all. Going to go back even further now. In 1996, I was awarded the Melbourne Press Club Young Journalist of the Year Award. If I could pass back to myself then a message from today, or to any of you here who are setting out on your journey, it's this. Amid all of that, the never-ending change, the new platforms, the old rancor, some things will stay the same. Facts matter most. The truth will prevail. Lived experience resonates. Narrative storytelling speaks to people's emotions. Beautiful writing cuts to the heart. Great pictures and audio are worth 1,000 words. Opinions are cheap. Curiosity and the quest to keep chasing it on behalf of others is never going out of fashion. And this career, journalism, has been the greatest privilege. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you, Gav. That was terrifically well spoken, and I love, as a journalist, being inspired, and I found that inspiring. And it's nice to have some hope in our often bleak industry. So I'll ask a few questions. I'd love then to see some hands, and I'll just pass. I think we'll pass the microphone around, and we can keep at this until 2 o'clock. So I'll get stuck into it. I remember my very first training day as a cadet at the ABC, and Peter Cave, a grizzly old foreign correspondent, was giving us the cadets instruction, and he regaled us with a story about Walter Hamilton, who was, I think, the news director then, sending an email that said, "Dear Mr. Cave, I noticed on your piece to cameras in conflict zones you don't wear a jacket and a tie. Could you kindly place a tie on?" And Peter Cave said to us, he wrote back, "Fuck off, you cardigan-wearing C-word." For me, it pointed to maybe a deeper issue that floats around in criticism of the ABC is who's running the joint. Is it the star journalists or is it management? And if it's the star journalists, is the ABC less accountable than it should be?
Well, Nick, it's a collaboration, is how I would put it. Look, the one thing that I think all ABC journalists are fiercely protective of is their independence, and sometimes that applies to management. So I often see when I get, lots of cheap advice from other media organisations where editorial policies are bestowed and decisions are taken in boardrooms and by editors, and then the journalists are effectively told that's where they're going. I'd rather be in this place. I'd rather be in a place where the journos are forthright and upfront and difficult at times and bloody annoying at times. But it's because they hold their independence so precious to what they do. And as a manager, of course there are times when that just causes you more grief than it should. But that's okay. The independence of the ABC, I think, matters more than any of that. And that's the thing that we got to come back to.
Where there's a potential journalistic failing, is it the fault of the journo or the EP or further up the tree?
It's usually the fault of a whole sequence of events when you make a clanger. And look, one of the things that people would say we've not done well enough in recent years is to sort of put our hands up and say, okay, we got that wrong, let's kind of cop it on the chin. That's not how it feels inside. Inside the ABC there is a very rigorous response to errors, to getting to the truth of them, because let's be honest, a lot of the conversation around perceived ABC errors are obvious, are either from vested interests in the story or from those who haven't necessarily seen the editorial process up close. So I think there is always a tension in a role like this to speak up for the journos and protect their journalism if it has gone through a very rigorous process and you trust that process. But equally, I hope that at times when we've genuinely just got something wrong, we put our hands up and say so, because that's what I think the public would expect from us. I take great comfort in the fact that amid all the change, amid all the criticism, amid all the controversy, the ABC is still trusted by 80% of Australians, and they're not the ones that write the articles and they're not the ones that speak up in public. So as long as the 80% of Australians think they can trust what we do, we're probably getting it pretty right.
I think if you read the criticism, and I'm mostly a massive fan of the ABC, but as an outsider now peering mostly in, I do feel sometimes the ABC struggles on those few occasions to admit when it stuffs up. And it seems to me, now we're not good at it either at Channel 9, but why doesn't the ABC, rather than throwing off to reviews and inquiries and releasing pretty defensive press releases, just say, when you get it wrong, we've stuffed up?
Because, look, I hope we do from time to time. I really genuinely hope we do. I also think it's often more complicated than that. And I'm not saying that to be, evasive of the question. I think these issues are never straight up and down, and one person's perceived error is another person's kind of lack of context. Or, okay, well, you could have included a little more of that to explain what it was you were trying to say. So I think these things are on a scale. A genuine factual stuff up, we should be absolutely upfront about that. But something that is in the context or the nuance of something that we could have explained better, or that we think we did, or that someone's got a different point of view on, that's usually what we're arguing about. It's a bit like the bias question at the ABC, right? So a lot of people say, well, the ABC's biased. The ABC's not biased. The ABC kind of very squarely down the middle reports both sides of any issue and every story, almost all the time, gives people a fair right of reply. What we sometimes have is that broader perception that we're not necessarily including the widest possible array of views or the widest possible reflection of stories that the public might be interested in. That's called out as bias. That's not bias. It doesn't mean it's not worth us addressing and it's not worth us trying to fix over time, but it's a different thing.
On the topic of bias, I think just this morning the New York Times is reporting that Cuomo from CNN has been stood aside. It's been revealed has been secretly backing his brother, a politician in New York. We learned the news, I think, in the last few days that Zoe Daniels, a very fine ABC foreign correspondent and journalist, is now running against the Liberal Party and attacking a Liberal Party assistant minister. Does that annoy you?
Doesn't annoy me. I mean, Zoe's a citizen now. She had a career at the ABC. She left it. She's gone off to do her own thing. She's a person of great integrity, and I don't care if she decides to be a circus clown or a politician. They might be quite similar in many ways, but she's entitled to pursue whatever career she wants to pursue. And a lot of people can say, well, every single person that ever worked at the ABC should somehow have that branded on their forehead as forevermore being associated, and if they take a view in the future or they take a job or they go and do something, that's somehow a reflection on the ABC. Good luck to Zoe as a citizen wanting to stand up for the issues that she wants to stand up for. She's also running against Labor too, because I think they're also running in that same seat. So, it's a Liberal-held seat, no doubt, but she's running as an independent.
Isn't a cooling off period, though, perhaps sensible? I take your point. She's now a citizen and a civilian, but not long out of the gates. And wrapping into that question, Twitter seems to be a pretty explosive, virulent platform for all of us in the media. And occasionally we see serving ABC journalists either engaging in the look at me, or getting pretty hyper-political on Twitter. Is that not eroding trust?
So related issues, you're right. The first one around, should there be a moratorium on an ABC person living their life? Seriously? I don't think there's anything wrong with somebody. Sometimes people resign from the ABC because they want to pursue another course or another career. Well, that's their choice. We're not here to kind of dictate them how to run their lives, honestly. People are allowed to be citizens, even though they once worked for the ABC. On social media, this is one of the great digital innovations that has not aged well, in my view, because it has debased the value of the conversation. It feels like it's very difficult to have an intelligent conversation anymore out there, and I think that is a great shame. And a lot of it has occurred because of what you see on social media. And look, again, this idea that we should just ban all ABC journalists from being on social media is a bit like saying we should ban all ABC journalists from speaking out loud in the pub. Crazy. What we should do is have really high standards. If you're an ABC staff member, we should have really high standards, and you should be held to account around those standards. And I think that in the future, we've gone through this very difficult period of trying to navigate people speaking freely in ways that they might never do in a broadcast. And I think we're trying to find ways to bring that into accordance with our code of conduct and our policies. But it is a bit at times like, wrestling an octopus. I think what you'll see from the ABC, though, eventually is the most rigorous approach to the way our staff interact on social media. And as I have said to all of our staff at the ABC, I do not need you to be on Twitter. We have ABC accounts on Twitter to kind of talk about our content and all the rest of it. You want to be on Twitter, be on Twitter. But you're there as an individual, and if you step out of line and you step out of the code of conduct, it's on you. And I think that's what you'll see in relation to the way social media works at the ABC, I'd suggest from here on in.
I've got one more question, and then please let's see some hands. I just wonder, the digital world and 24-hour news, both they're parts of your legacy. You've transformed both of the ABC very successfully, yet at the same time, the hunger for quicker output leads to more mistakes. The hunger for bigger audiences online leads to sometimes what I see as an ABC news website that's a bit cheap and nasty. Are these the pitfalls of this ongoing experiment?
I think it's finding the velocity at which you can travel successfully in any media organisation at the moment. And I don't think that's an ABC question. I think that's a question for each and every media organisation. I had this conversation in the Melbourne newsroom this morning. Please do fewer stories tomorrow than you did today, because we can't travel at the same velocity serving all the different platforms in all the different ways and do all the different stories we once might have done in that same way, where you had one television news bulletin and radio news on the hour. It's just not possible. So we, like every media organisation, have got to cut our cloth accordingly. We've got to maintain high standards, and if that means fewer stories, then that's the cloth that we'll cut. But you tell me one newsroom that isn't grappling with that isn't struggling with that hasn't seen a decline in quality at the expense of the rise in volume. I've been talking for many years about something I call fewer, bigger, better in the newsrooms. I want fewer stories, done better, done more fully, And I actually think that is how we have risen to be number one on digital, because the quality of the journalism that we're putting on digital is much, much better than it used to be.
Not seeing a photo. Yes, g'day, Hugh.
Hugh Nayland from 9 News, Gavin. Thanks
nice
for
to see you, mate. Good to see you.
The mood at the recent demonstrations in Melbourne has been pretty febrile, and the attitude towards reporters and camera operators, in particular, the abuse that they've been copping, has been pretty severe. What's your take on that, and for your organisation, is that one of the biggest challenges facing the third leg of the Morris administration?
I mean, look, the health and safety of our teams has got to be the number one priority. Frankly, it's got to matter more than the story. What we're seeing here in Melbourne and, I suppose around the country and overseas, we're in this kind of very divisive, very fraught moment. I'd like to think that these are such small fringes of society that would do the sorts of things that they do to people in the streets at the moment. It's shocking to us all. But I think, we've got to cover the news right, but I think one of the things that we've got to do a little more soberly is work out what's newsworthy in these protests, and how much of it is actually helping the public conversation and public interest by kind of going live from the middle of these things. We've had that conversation extensively at ABC News, and we've withdrawn a bit. In fact, we've withdrawn a lot. Making good calls as editors, I think, is sometimes about absolutely deciding what to cover, but equally about what not to cover. And we're not here to censor the view or censor what people see and hear. And if people have legitimate points of view, they should absolutely be reflected in our coverage. I'm just not sure I see a lot of legitimate points of view in some of these protests. And so I think we've got to make good decisions around that.
Hi, Gavin. Dan Zipper, ABC News.
Oh, here he is.
Everyone's being very polite. You should hear what we ask him internally.
Yeah, table 4. I'm waiting for the question, okay? So,
inside the ABC and the Australian media, we talk a lot about Sydney and the dominance of it. Melbourne is now part of the problem. We'll soon be the largest city in Australia. What impact does it have on the news for Australia that so much of the power, but also so much of the media production, comes out of just these two cities?
That's a really good question, and there's a few parts to it, really. One, we are too Sydney-focused at the ABC. We have too many people in Ultimo, and David Anderson and the leadership team there, I think, are having a discussion again about that today at their strategy day, because we have got to decentralise. What happened over many years at the ABC was we had a series of budget cuts, and what makes good financial sense is centralising your resources and getting economy of scale out of what you've got. Unfortunately, that makes terrible cultural sense. And so I think what we've got to look at now is how can we get out of Ultimo? How can we get back into more of the states and territories? I just mean in news, I mean in all sorts of things that we do at the ABC. We've got more people in regional Australia than we've ever had, and that's been a brilliant innovation over the last few years. More people in rural and regional Australia reporting from there. But I'm a passionate advocate of the Parramatta project. It's not particularly popular in Ultimo. But the idea that we can have half of our staff in one building and everybody living within 10 k's of it just isn't sustainable if we're reflecting the full community. So I can't wait to see 300 ABC staff at Parramatta and staff in Bankstown and Liverpool and Frankston and more in Geelong and, Cairns and Townsville and places where Australians are, as well as Sydney, the centre of Sydney and the centre of Melbourne. So we've done as you know, Dan, we've done a strategy over the last few years I've called More Relevant to More Australians. And the whole point of it is to say, how do we get into those parts of the community that we've not been very good at listening to or reflecting at the ABC? How do we listen to what's going on in those places in a much more thoughtful way and reflect that back in our coverage? I think it's good sense to do that as a charter responsibility, but frankly, I'm just greedy and I like larger audiences. And I figure if we're out in the kind of parts of Australia that haven't been using us very much and we can be more appealing and more reflective of those parts of Australia, we'll likely grow our audience. So there's so many bits to that, but premise of the question is, I think decentralisation is a really important part of the ABC's 5-year plan, and I think we've got to get our skates on.
Joseph Dunstan in the ABC's Melbourne newsroom.
Come on, Jason.
We've spoken a bit about the critics of the ABC, so I'm curious to know what's the most dramatic or offensive personal and private exchange that you've had with a member of the government during your time as news director?
He's risen to the challenge. And he stumped me. Look, I suppose I can talk generically, because I think what I find sometimes, offensive in the context is the entitlement of some of those people. I remember very recently someone criticised me because I apparently might be afraid of a press secretary ringing me up and kind of, somehow trying to influence something that we were doing at the ABC. And I thought, I've stood in Charles Taylor's office in Liberia with a security guard that was 3 times the size of me, saying he knew where I stayed. If he didn't like our report, he was going to come and cut my throat. Press secretaries don't really intimidate me. And so when politicians pick up the phone and, think they're all powerful, and they can tell you what to do and they'll give you their full and frank view, I find fewer things less intimidating than that, because it all comes from a place whereby you know where they're coming from, you know why they're doing it, you know they feel entitled to say that to you. Now, I'm not saying that when powerful people ring you and get in touch with you that they might not have a valid concern and that you shouldn't listen to the valid concern where they have one. But that culture in politics of picking up the phone to an editor and yelling at the down the line because somehow that's going to kind of change your mind as an editor, I think both that era is going, and so I get very few of those calls these days, because I think the few people that tried it found it wasn't a very effective strategy.
Hi, Gaven.
Hey,
hello. I'm Erwin from Asia Pacific Newsroom and also ABC Indonesia. And I just want to say thank you so much for your strategy for bringing people like me, whose English is not first language and completely looks different, but had an opportunity to be part of the ABC News. And your strategy has been articulated well by Matthew O'Sullivan, my managing editor here. And also, I've been supported a lot to do a lot of TV stories by Joanna McCarty from 7 p.m. So thank you so much. But
Pleasure.
My question is, this is also shared by other team members with ABC Indonesia and also ABC China. Why does it take so long for finally, bringing us into the newsroom and not just translating stories?
Great question. For a long time, remember that our language teams in the ABC were part of a diplomatic grant, a soft power kind of sort of initiative at the ABC. And I think at the point in time where the government came along and removed the budget for that entire initiative, that liberated us to say, you know what, rather than doing stories from our Asia Pacific News Centre to kind of appeal to building diplomatic bridges to China or Indonesia, why don't we just do some journalism? Why don't we just do stories that are genuinely kind of exploring real stories and issues that Indonesian Australians, Chinese Australians, Indonesians in Indonesia or Chinese people in China might be really interested in doing? And I think what you have done as a team has been so revolutionary in the last few years, because you put aside the soft diplomacy idea, you picked up your pens and your phones and you just got stuck into some really great journalism. And so I think you should all be really proud of that. It did take us too long. But what you guys are doing now, you should be so very proud of.
Hi, former boss.
Imogen.
Hi. Imogen Crump, University of Melbourne. I think the ABC really did come into its own during COVID, right? Became the most trusted source where you went to get your information about the pandemic. I also think there has been this increase in public trust in experts and expert commentary. So for research institutions like the University of Melbourne, that's really important. But there still seems to be a real disconnect between journalists and the perception that our academics are crusty, dry, boring, talking heads. So how do we join that up? Because that expert commentary is something that was so necessary during the pandemic.
It's a really great question. And let me say this. I think this is one area that I have tried to push on a lot of doors and made no progress on, and it's this piece. I don't understand why journalism and the media and the knowledge industries and academia aren't collaborating in so many more ways. I don't understand it. Now, maybe it's because our wheels turn slowly and we're in big organisations that can have some bureaucracy at times. But I really think we've got to explore an era where the knowledge-based industries and the media absolutely more hand in glove. You know, even journalism schools, I do not understand why working in media organisations isn't just fully sewn into journalism courses and isn't absolutely part of media studies courses and all of those sorts of things. But you're right about, you know, imagine if you had all this knowledge, if only you had somewhere to put it. And we've got all these platforms, if only we had something good to put on them. Why aren't we getting that collaboration piece solved? And a few people in this room, Michelle will know, we you know, Tash will know, we've tried so many different things to try to find ways to collaborate with the academic world. And you know, the Conversation was a really great initiative, you know, really supportive of what the Conversation was doing, and we started publishing all their stories and providing them with a link back. RMIT, ABC Fact Check, you know, absolutely fantastic initiative that's kicking goals. Each state and territory, you can see really great projects. It's a great thing we're doing in Queensland around young journalists pitching stories and then getting commissioned to produce them at the ABC. But these are too small and too far between, and why aren't we collaborating on a much bigger scale? I think there's such a great opportunity there.
Hi Gavin, Sophie Ellsworth from The Australian.
Hi Sophie.
I just wanted to bring back to social media, where you talked about issues with social media and how journalists will be on their own if something goes wrong with social media. So you obviously had that Andrew Laming defamation case where you indemnified the journalist in that situation. So how do you explain that to journalists now if they step out of line? Are they on their own? And has this set a really dangerous precedent that the ABC will pick up any costs if it does go down the legal route?
Well, I think there's been a whole sequence of different issues around staff use of social media, right? And I think our only response to that is, again, I think this idea that we should just ban all of our journalists from ever speaking in public about anything on any platform is bonkers. But what we do need to do is to be able to say, where do our policies are not clear enough to staff? You know, and how do we make sure that you understand what the Code of Conduct tells you your responsibilities are as a journalist or as a staff member at the ABC, and then you are crystal clear about how that's going to apply should you choose to then go off on a social platform and do something that is outside of that code of conduct or outside of the editorial policies. And I think it took us a while to navigate that. As frankly, it's taken every media organisation, particularly publicly funded ones where the scrutiny is so much higher. I mean, I see journalists from all sorts of organisations saying, you know, bonkers stuff out there on social media, but they're entitled to, right? Because they work for commercial media. They can say what they like. They're not publicly accountable. Our journalists are publicly accountable. One of the really clear messages, and a lot of the young journos were confused by this, because for years we were telling them all to be on social media, to promote their content, to get out there and build a profile and to sort of build a personal brand. Now we are saying to them the exact opposite. You know, we do not need you to be on social media for your job. If you want to be there, that is your personal choice. But you must understand what the code of conduct and the editorial policies require you do as a person that is not a staff, as you know, individually, effectively. And so it's taken us a while to work that out. But I think that what you will see from here on in is a much more rigorous approach to that. And I'm only saying this mildly as a warning to all the ABC journos. I think we will be a lot more hands-on, you know, post my time, in looking at the way editorial policies and code of conduct is applied to personal use of social media.
Gavin, can I just ask David Brill here? Gavin,
ladies and gentlemen, the great David Brill, one of the ABC's most esteemed photographers, storytellers.
Oh, thank you. Gavin, coming from the great state of Tasmania and now been back there for a while, there's always talk about, will we ever get back the 7:30 state programs, Monday to Thursday? Much we have a national program, but it is the national broadcaster. Why haven't we still got state 7:30s, for an example?
Yeah, well, I've heard that question once or twice in my time, but David, it's a valid question because, look, remember the state-based 7:30s, you don't have to go back too far when every night of the week they were state-based. And they did a really good job, and many of the great interviews with premiers and opposition leaders at a state level were done on that program. But a few things happened. One, our budgets were consistently chipped away at. And the demands of audiences on other platforms radically escalated. So what you then have to do with precious public money, in my view, is to look at where audiences are and where you can provide the most value. And the idea that we would end up spending what would be, I can't remember what the state-based editions were worth when we lost them, but it would be $4 or $5 million a year for those state-based 7:30s once a week on a Friday night with tiny audiences, when you can do a higher quality of journalism at a local level on digital platforms, in video on demand, in all sorts of new methods that audiences are up for consuming. So unfortunately, television is expensive, and unfortunately, we have less money than we used to. And so we've just got to reflect the contemporary audience experience, and that's why I don't think you'll see state-based 7:30s coming back.
Just quickly, can I say, as a member of the public and a member of the Friends of the ABC and the alumni, thank you for your passion and caring so much at your time at the ABC and the great respect that you have for so many of us. Thank you very much.
I appreciate it.
I think we're going to wrap it up. That's a tremendous note to finish on. I guess one last question for you, Gav. What next?
The steely look, see that? So, what next? I'm not keen to do another large executive job like this in the near future. I think I've had my fill of steering committees and budget meetings and, the HR issues that come across your desk when you have 1,200 staff and all of those sorts of things. So I'd like to take a bit of a break for that. I love transformation. I love projects, and I love moving the furniture around the room. So what I want to do, I think, in my next chapter is to find some of that kind of project-based work, whether that's doing a bit of consultancy, whether that's doing a bit of digital strategy, whether that is absolutely about looking to work with organisations who I share values with, and building a transformation process around that. I love projects. It's what I've, the great jobs that I've done along the way, joining CNN.com as a digital startup, helping to start Al Jazeera English, launching the news channel, doing Equal Digital Life at the ABC. These are the things that float my boat, and believe it or not, 2-hour steering committees do not. And so I figure I'll go with the former.
We wish you all the best from the Melbourne Press Club. Thanks so much for
Thanks
for
very
today.
much.
Thanks very much to Gaven. Thank you for sharing your story. Thank you for inspiring those in the room. And we really do look forward to you keeping in touch with the Melbourne Press Club in your next journey. We have a small thank you gift for both Nick McKenzie moderating today and you, Gaven, so thank you. A quick recap, everybody. Again, remiss of me if I don't promote the Quill Awards coming up on the 18th of March. We look forward to seeing as many of you there as possible. And our Student Journalism Award is open, so please let your colleagues know and those that need to know to get the entries in.